Welcome, everybody, to Full Spectrum Universe. My name is Rob Yox, and today we're going to be doing a topic that I so truly love. When they first mentioned it, it got me very, very excited. It's called Space Force. Space Force, Space Force. Donald Trump's inaugural sixth branch of the military. So let's get right into it. Space Force is it's actually something that was much different than all the rest of them. This one, of course, pertained to space. As you can see on the screen, we have one of their rockets, as long as their insignia. Their insignia we'll talk about just a little bit, but Space Force was established on December 20th, 2019 in Hangar 6 at the Joint Base Andrews, which is a Joint Chiefs of Staff base that has just about every type of military that we have inside of it. So the next part is that when it was enacted, it was supposed to be into the fiscal year of 2020. And this is under the National Defense Authorization Act. And it will be fully stood up over the next 18 months from that 2019 time. They are known as the U.S. Space Force, USSF. USSF was established within the Department of the Air Force, meaning the Secretary of the Air Force has the overall responsibility for the USFF, which is basically it runs under the guise of Space Force, which is an enacted branch of the military, but it's still under the Air Force regulation as well. They basically what they did is they still run under the guidance of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, of course, where all the armed forces go to, which in then turn goes to the president. The four-star general that is called the Chief of Space Operations. His name is John W. Raymond. John W. Raymond is a four-star general in the Air Force, and he moved over to the Space Force to take the CSO position. And the CSO, like I said, is a Joint Chief of Staff. So we went into that a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about the people of Space Force itself, or what Space Force actually has. It is the active duty Air Force officers that establish or enlisted personnel in an existing space career fields, and also with the select career fields are eligible to transfer or apply to transfer to the Space Force. Approximately 16,000 military and civilians from the former U.S. Air Force Space Command are now assigned to the new service. They are also recruiting now. The slogan is, "Wouldn't you like to live your life among the stars?" And I mean, I know I would. There are, right as of right now, there are 88 active duty members and 16,000 assigned military personnel from the Air Force itself, and they also have 77 spacecraft, which I'm dying to see that. And a little bit more history of what it is basically Air Force Space Command is what it derived from, and that was actually came about on September 1st, 1992. And what that did was it basically patrolled the skies after NASA had gone to the moon. They decided that of course, this is about 13 years later, but it was basically looking at the fact that we needed to have some kind of regulation in space. So what they did was they went ahead, they made the air defense for the space defense for the Air Force. So well, that's to me that's pretty cool. You know, like I said, this is one of my favorite topics. I mean, the Space Force is just amazing. And it's pretty cool to watch what everybody's what they go through, and you see they were kind of with the emblem and things like that. They ripped it off from Star Trek a little bit, Star Trek Command. So, as we go into that, they unveiled different types of slogans and signs to really, this is actually the next step in like military evolution to me. But their mission, the USSF, is a military service that organizes, trains, and equips Space Force in order to protect the U.S. and allied interests in space, and to provide space capabilities to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All right, so we're going to go to the responsibilities of the Space Force. The responsibilities of the USF are develop military space professionals, acquire military space systems, as in satellites, things like that, to take over a lot of defense for the planet, maturing the military doctrine for the space power and organizing space forces to present as combat commands, which means so they can run missions into space. And basically, we can colonize the moon and Mars and go further than that. There's really no limit to what the Space Force can do. The further out we go, the more substantial they become. You know, as we have like our Marines, they're always the first ones in, and they basically the Marines and the Army tackle land and ground troops. We also have the Navy, which does all the water, and now we also have the Air Force, which basically takes the skies. We have the Space Force, which takes even further out into the atmosphere. So, and just to go back to about some more about the people of the USS Air Force is Air Force Space Command was redesigned as the USF as an initial step to establish the branch. Military members that were assigned to the Air Force Space Command are now assigned to the USSF, I apologize, but still remain airmen with the U.S. Air Force. Air Force space-related personnel were transferred to Space Force. The Department of Defense vision is to consolidate space missions from across the armed forces into the USSF as they appropriate and consist within the law, which is pretty cool. Anything that, you know, basically what they do is they have the law of, you know, the accords, the Paris Accords, that are basically they have to stay within references to humanity, so they don't step outside that branch, or they don't go into any kind of crimes against humanity or war crimes, as we should say. So, yeah. Now, once we when we go back here to the flag, what we see with the flag is it's basically this is where they were presenting it to Donald Trump in a professional manner, which was a big deal to them. They felt like that they were basically taking a stand at that moment and showing them, hey, you know, we've got Raymond over here in the corner. We also have the top sergeant, who is the top military non-officer in the Space Force branch. So basically, another thing that we're looking at were the capabilities. The capabilities of the USSF will maintain and enhance the competitive edge to the Department of Defense and space while adapting to new strategic challenges. That's part of their uniforms as well. Also, spacelift operations at the East and West Coast launch basics that provide service, facilities, and the range of safety control for the conduct of the Defense Department, NASA, and commercial space launches. So basically, they, you know, to go ahead and launch from the East Coast, West Coast. Of course, you know that there's Cape Canaveral, Florida. On the West Coast, they are certainly doing it at other places. As you can see, we have a air marine here, or a wingman, as they are called. So basically, another thing for them to do is basically when they start making spaceships that go through space or travel into space, they will be aboard those. So of course, there will be admirals and things like that controlling those specific things, and defense of the planet for any in case there's any incursion from any alien life. So another portion of what they're trying to do is the satellites. Satellites provide essential in-theater secure communications, weather, and navigational data from the ground, air, and fleet operations and threat warnings. So basically, once they have all their satellites, they're going to make a grid, which is part of what I believe Starlink is going to be doing once it hits the atmosphere. And once they have that grid, they'll be able to detect anything moving. They'll be able to strategically look at battlefields, and Space Force can come up with plans and enact certain strategies to go ahead and help the ground troops as well. And another thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to make space bases, like I said. So they'll also be shooting these satellites around any type of planet that they so do make these bases in, which will give them a run of the terrain, the weather. It'll help them basically cooperate with living conditions on that planet, what they need, what they have to do, the strategy of it all. So last factoid that we have is that the ground-based and space-based systems to monitor ballistic missiles launches around the world, and they guard against the surprise missile attack of North America. So another thing, like I said, they're basically there to detect all different types of launches of any type of missiles or nuclear warfare that may happen on the planet, while spreading us out into basically, into space, and I think that this is really cool because to me, like I said before, this is the next evolutionary step in our military. Once we are in the stars and moving amongst the stars, we have to be able to protect ourselves. I know if I was a little bit younger, I probably would try and get into the Air Force to get onto Space Force, because my dream, and I've always had an affinity with the stars, was to take a spaceship and travel around the universe, and see different planets and things like that. I think that it's really cool. Also, just on a different note, we'll be putting out certain topics like this in short form. So it's not going to be a whole podcast, but there's information given to you and some facts and how I feel about things. So you have a little bit more content, a little bit more to go on, and they're not so super long. So you can sit down, take in what there has to be about specific topics. I may even take shows from the podcasts and break them down here into a visual format so you can get a good idea of what basically what's trying to be done, and what happens when when we're trying to explain certain things. Is sometimes it's easier to see things, but just I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and hopefully this was informative to you. And remember, this is a really important time out in society. Remember, love is the most important thing in times like these, okay? And everything that you do, it's always about the details. Details will make or break you in the future. So, and if, like I said, if you have things you want to go ahead and follow or pursue and research them and then bring them to the table, you can always message me on Facebook or on YouTube itself. So you can go ahead and like we could discuss maybe a topic for the show, but also go to patreon.com and subscribe. We'll be doing a little bit more of that later. Right now, all content is going to be free. But thank you for watching. I'm Rob Yox, and this is Full Spectrum Universe.